What's going on, everyone? Pardon my voice still. I am a little bit sick, but I had to go out and record a video because we had an absolutely just insane weekend, just an incredible weekend. We had so many planetary qualifiers happen across the board. Okay. Tons of data rolling in with multiple tournaments over that 50 player mark, including a couple over the 100 mark. And then we also had a regional qualifier coming in with 860 players over in Europe. It was an incredible weekend for competitive Star Wars Unlimited, and well, it was a really competitive weekend for, spoiler alert, Data Vault. Data Vault was the huge winner in this weekend. We had a lot of decks representing it. Before we dive into, well, I'm going to talk about the winners of a lot of these planetary qualifiers. There's a lot to go over, so I'm going to stick to the winners of the planetary qualifier and then actually dive into the deck lists of the regional qualifier top 8 members. Before we do, big thank you to my patrons over on Patreon. Guys, thank you for supporting the channel. We hosted a little bit of stream on Saturday. We got to go out and play a fun list that I'm probably going to be recording a video for soon, so definitely check it out in the description down below. Let's start off first with the regional qualifier, and then we'll dive back into the planetary qualifiers in just a moment. But this was an insane weekend. We had Sabine Data Vault taking the entire tournament, which is not something that I would have expected at all. We're going to be talking about the list in a moment, but in terms of Data Vault, if you just look at the games, Sabine Data Vault didn't really have that much of a showing, okay? So the data here is really not to be trusted, I would say. It really will take some more time to figure out what Sabine Data Vault and what the, well, genius of Data Vault's list here is. But it seems, in terms of what the data looks like, is that you get a little bit of a better matchup up against Sabine particularly, and a little bit more of the aggressive decks in general. Sabine already pumps in so much damage that even without ECL, Poe, or ECL Wrecker, you're still able to just put on that massive pressure and then outrace a ton of people. The extra 10 cards that you get in the Data Vault doesn't really affect the overall deck nearly as much. And I've been saying Data Vault's praises for quite some time, as well as many of you in the community have as well. But Data Vault getting you that extra 8 HP over ECL, which is what typically you are running in Sabine, gives you a huge dynamic over the other Sabines and other Quinlins that are trying to be a little bit more aggressive. These are the matchups that I think Data Vault's really trying to exploit. Again, there were no Sabine Data Vault mirrors because there were very few, if any. I don't even know if there were any other Data Vaults in this tournament, but it was certainly interesting to see just how well it performed. The other thing was we had multiple Data Vaults in the top 8. It wasn't just Sabine, and it wasn't just multiple versions of the same deck like Kira Data Vault, which has been really performing well in general this weekend, but rather it was Ray Data Vault, Kira Data Vault, and Sabine Data Vault. The extra HP just goes to show you how strong that can truly be. It is and was the most represented base in the top 8, which is incredible. We also had double Anakin Blue showing up, 3 Sabines, 2 of which ECL, 1 of which Data Vault. And I do think it's worth talking about these separately because not just the base is different, which changes the playstyle, but more importantly, the deck composition is way different than a typical ECL list. We had Quinlan Red, we had also a Ray Green, as I mentioned, and a Kira Green, both with Data Vault, all of which pretty expansive meta and a really exciting one to see. But I'm not going to wait any longer. We're going to dive straight in. Here is the Sabine Data Vault list. And when we start into the ground units, a lot of these are pretty typical. We've got your Battlefield Marines, your Cassians, your fighters, which can be in some and not others, depending on the list. Sabine Ren, Sundari Peacekeepers, Poes, Wreckers, even though you're not ECLing, you still have them in the list. All pretty standard stuff. One of the kind of curious ones to be adding is Frisk. Now, for those of you that don't know what Frisk does, this is the new pilot from Jump to Lightspeed, the one that goes ahead and pilots for 2, for +2/+2, and then you're able to defeat an upgrade that costs 2 or less. This can really take out mostly your random experience and shield tokens. It doesn't usually hit pilots all that often because it cares about the cost of that actual upgrade, but it will take out all your token upgrades very frequently. And we also have 3 Ketsu Onyos, which does very similar thing, which is take out those cheap upgrades. Very, very interesting to see that it indexes more towards this, but it makes a lot of sense with all the random 1 of 2 of upgrades running around. And then we dive into the space arena, which is where it gets a lot more different because most of the list over here, yes, the Frisk and Ketsu. Ketsu was sometimes played in other Sabine lists, but everything else is pretty much standard. But then we get into the space arena, and we have a couple of new ones. We've got the Senatorial Corvette, the Adelphi Patrol Wing, and the Radis, which is something that I would not have expected to be played in a Sabine list. This is kind of strange. I honestly didn't watch nearly enough matchups because I said I've been sick a little bit to determine whether or not this actually is a card that you should be playing. This is the 7 resource space unit with a 8/6 body, I believe. And then when it dies, you get to go out and deal 8 damage to an enemy unit. It's kind of interesting, and I do think this is part of the reason as to why it has a little bit of a better matchup against some of the mid-range decks, so that does make sense. But more importantly, it's just a big old unit, realistically. The Senatorial Corvette makes a lot of sense, discarding things when it dies. Again, especially against Kira, these 2 cards make a lot of sense. Things that get value when they're dying, well, that's what Kira's trying to do, and it's going to go ahead and reach into the late game. But I think also on top of that, even though you have this really aggressive package with the standard Rebel attack curve with Rebel Assault and all this stuff, you have that late game with the Radis, the Senatorial Corvette, the Timelies, with the Poes and Wreckers and all that good stuff. Lots of direct damage, which can really help you out in the late game, so that Sabine can even grind harder as a more mid-range style of deck. And that's even further proven with the sideboard. We have 3 copies of Cham and 3 copies of Crate Dragon, which typically come in for the things like the Kira matchup, for the things like the Han matchup, maybe not the Crate Dragons, but Cham himself. This card, being able to ramp you, is incredibly strong. As we've spoke about way back when the first time this was revealed, this was like what I mentioned, the number 1 sideboard card, or one of the number 1 sideboard cards from the new set. If you're aggression and you're fighting up against someone that's ramping, or just a Han, you're playing Cham just because of how strong this card is. And then the Crate Dragons come in against those more mid-rangey style of decks, or even late game decks, to where you actually have a ton of direct damage. You have the Flora Causes, the K2s, you have the Crate Dragons, all which deal kind of direct damage. The Fighters for Freedom, the Sabine's Action, and this can really just kind of slowly grind out the game, which is really impressive. I think this list is very unique and something that kind of takes a different spin on Sabine, fighting on a different angle that people are not normally used to. Then we also have the Anakin Blue. This one's pretty standard. I want to talk a lot about the lists here, but to be honest, there's nothing too crazy going on with this Anakin Blue list. I think the only thing that is really something that people are more interested in is going to be the Outer Rim Outlaws. Everything else is, as I said, something that people have been running already. The Yodas, the C-3POs to draw extra cards, the R2-D2s. Main deck Disabling Fang Fighters can be a little bit surprising depending on your actual interest in Anakin. There's no Colossus, which is also something to consider, but Outer Rim Outlaws, a great addition. It's a 3/3 shielded, becomes a 5/3 in Anakin, doesn't die, can trade off with multiple units. That's the idea there. We have another Quinlan Red. This is also not surprising, pretty standard stuff here. This one is running the Grogu, which is something that, well, benefits with Force Throw a ton, but also just a little bit more of a tempo-based style. Again, multiple Disabling Fang Fighters. The card's just good. Lots of upgrades in the meta. Bamboozle as well. I think the full 3 of makes a lot of sense. This card, I mentioned this way back in set 1, but I had said, guys, we got to be on the lookout for Bamboozle. Any card that's free, the more cards we get, there's way more likelihood that Bamboozle is going to be a broken card. And I do think Bamboozle is one of those cards where it does feel broken to play. When you're paying 0, and you're exhausting, and maybe just resetting your opponent's play. Like they go turn 1, they're playing Han, they play Millennium Falcon. Turn 2, they go ahead and do the whole I'm going to put Chewbacca on it, and you bamboozle for free. It's disgusting. It just is. But pretty standard stuff with Quinlan here. Nothing too crazy going on. We have another ECL, Sabine. This one, again, literally the same Sabine we've been seeing. We got a very big Rebel aggro package. We've got the Luke Skywalker and Chewbacca as pilots, which are the new additions. And I say new lightly because it's been in the, well, meta for a long time. And it's part of the reason why people are playing things like Frisk. I think people are playing things like disabling Fang Fighters, because when you are playing disabling Fang Fighters and you get to take out a Luke, that's pretty impressive. Now, this also is part of the reason why Frisk was played in Sabine, and part of the reason why it has such a good matchup is piloting Frisk and taking out a Luke Skywalker is amazing. You get a big unit and you get to take off one of their pilots for 2 resources when they potentially spent 3 on that, which is, again, just amazing. But Sabine's masterpiece, Chewbacca, Luke, these are the real 3 new additions to the deck. Outside of that, the list has been pretty much the same. Really cool to see a gray-green in the meta as well. In the top 8, this one is very, very similar to kind of what Rey has been already doing, which is taking advantage of all these cheap units with low power. I think Alliance Dispatcher makes a good amount of sense in Rey as well. Yes, it does die to 3 toughness or 3 power units, but similar to Luke, at least it pulls it out of range of some of the more commonly played 2 powered units, and that can make it a lot more valuable. But we have just a lot of solid 1-drops. They get value from the experience token. A lot of really solid units. Sundari Peacekeeper is amazing in Rey. You get the Restore. You can go out and put multiple experience tokens on it. You get things like, just in green, things like, well, Spark of Hope, Ewing reinforcements, which are amazing to either ramp. You get resupply alongside Spark of Hope. Ewing reinforcements and Home One just give you a way better late game than Aggression typically does. Aggression does have the Crate Dragon, which is great, don't get me wrong, but I'd rather have Home Ones and Ewing reinforcements for the late game, especially in conjunction with resupply and Spark of Hope, so that I can more consistently get to those. We also have just Entrenched, and I think this is an interesting one because we haven't seen a ton of Entrenched, but I found this to just be way more useful in general on one of your own units. We have a lot of just value units in the ground, and trying to get to the late game is pretty nice. Traders also works extremely well against a lot of those space units. If you'll note, we don't really have a ton of space interaction in terms of units. We have Fell the Dragon, Entrenched, and Traitorous. Those 3 are kind of the upgrades / events that deal with the space. And then, of course, we have the blue leaders to take out some early space units, but that's kind of the goal with Rey. It's a very interesting list as well. And look, 62 cards in the deck. Kind of fun. Kira Data Vault, this one, we've probably seen this the most over the past couple of weeks. It has a pretty good matchup up against some of the most popular lists, which is why Kira has been played so much. We already knew Kira Green was a list that was to be on the lookout for since set 2, really. Kira has just been performing quite well. And the key is actually the Overwhelming Barrage Kira flip turn. It is just one of the most incredible turns in the entire game. Just flipping Kira and then having a guaranteed option. Well, not quite guaranteed because your opponent can take it out with one of their units, but have a unit that you can most likely apply Overwhelming Barrage to. But not only that, a unit that shrinks units down so that Overwhelming Barrage can actually finish off their entire board is also the key portion, right? When you're on 5 resources and you've played a bunch of units, it is very unlikely for you to flip Kira, even if someone's playing like a Poe Dameron, and not be able to Overwhelming Barrage their entire board. Because if you just kind of give this idea where, let's say they have an overwhelming board, like let's say they're playing Sabine, and you've killed a couple earlier plays, but then they have their 4-cost unit, which was, let's say they played a K2SO, they have Sabine on the board, and then they play a Poe Dameron. Well, guess what? Sabine, well, takes a bunch of damage. K2SO takes a bunch of damage from Kira, and then Poe also takes a bunch of damage, right? And remember, with Kira's flip ability, it's equal to half its remaining HP rounding down. So Sabine takes 2, K2 takes 2, and then your Poe Dameron takes 3. So what you do, Overwhelming Barrage, you get to knock out Poe and K2 just straight up, and then you get to attack into Sabine, which makes your Kira a 6-2 in following turns, which can end this game really quickly, but also just wipes out their entire board, which is crazy. And that's not considering that you, like, maybe you played a unit on turn 4, right? All sorts of random stuff could happen. But that's one of the things that makes the deck really, really powerful. Very controlling based, but just traditional villainy command. I think Traitorous seeing a huge resurgence here makes a good amount of sense because people are relying on a lot of Millennium Falcons. It's also a little bit dangerous though, up against, all the decks that are running Disabling Fang Fighters main deck. You've got things like Confiscate running in the main decks and all sorts of just upgrade hate. So Traitorous, although Traitorous has been way better because of things like Millennium Falcon and Chewbacca being applied to it, it's also gotten balanced out by the fact that there's so much upgrade hate in the meta right now. But that is the entirety of your top 8. I didn't go over some of the duplicates. Like there was another Anakin list, another ECL Sabine list. Sabine Data Vault, really the big winner here. It was very impressive to see. But as I said, I wanted to quickly go over all of the planetary qualifiers. You can see there are numerous amounts. If I were to go through, what is this? This is 5, 10, roughly 15, like 20 or so planetary qualifiers. Now, some of these are a little bit of a joke in terms of basing it data off of it, right? Like 11 players for one of them, 5 players for another, 15 for another. But as I said, there's also 50, 60 player planetary qualifiers, 180 player planetary qualifiers, or 114 player planetary qualifier. This was actually the side event for the regional qualifier. So it was a lot more. But if you look, who's the big winner? Kira Data Vault. Kira Data Vault. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 Kiras. 5 of them Data Vault, 1 of them ECL. We also had multiple Quinlins take some top spots. Boss Blue, Han Green, Cad Bane Red, Yoda Data Vault. But guess what? Look at the Data Vaults here. This is why I mentioned Data Vault was the huge winner. We have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7 Data Vaults taking down tournaments. And that's across 3 different leaders. Really huge showing from Data Vault. And we've talked a lot about Tarkentown and how that might need a ban. I wasn't quite on that level as a lot of people. And I know people are still probably going to talk about Tarkentown. And I'm not saying that it should be completely ignored, but just shows you how the meta has adapted since then. Tarkentown is kind of being dwarfed, not necessarily in popularity yet, because Data Vault is sort of a new concept, but Kira Data Vault just has such an amazing matchup. If we were to pop over back to the results, if you look, Kira Data Vault just having that extra HP has a really good matchup against Sabine, and we knew this for a while, but it also has a really good matchup against Quinlan Red, which is something that I mentioned weeks and weeks ago, and one of the reasons why people are playing Kira in general. If you look, actually, the decks that take down Kira are going to be the more value-oriented decks. We've got things like Vader from Vader 1, Boss Blue. These Kira Green kind of gets dwarfed by decks that are going bigger than her, because Kira focuses more on controlling the early game. When you go up against things like Luke Green or Vader Green, they just have more powerful leaders innately, and then they are indexing a little bit more towards the mid game because that's where they take over the game, and that's where they're able to compete with Kira. But when you're fighting up against a meta with a ton of Sabines and a ton of Quinlins, I think Sabine was like 15% of the meta, and then Kira coming in at like 10%, I believe that was the case. You could just see the value of Kira showing up and really taking over. This is awesome. Honestly, it's awesome to see. If you look through all these lists, there's a lot of variety, even in the leaders that we are seeing. As I said, Sabine Data Vault is a completely different story than Sabine ECL. It is a completely different thing and completely different deck. Whole different strategy in terms of what you're trying to do. And then Sabine ECL, still an absolute standard. Doesn't mean that Sabine ECL is the weaker version of the two necessarily. I still find Sabine ECL going to be the far more consistent variant, at least right now. But because Sabine Data Vault had a good matchup and there was a good pilot on it, well, suddenly we found ourselves in a good situation for Sabine Data Vault to go on and take over. Quinlan Red, still a consideration. Han Green, Bosk Blue, all of these are classics, and all of these are things that you have to keep in mind when you're building your decks. But overall, The meta is absolutely awesome to watch and track, and I'm very excited for the future of the game, especially coming off the high of seeing Darth Revan. Not gonna lie, guys, that was pretty exciting. I know he doesn't look that great, but I don't really care. I'm just excited to see Revan and the whole Legends Porter thing and everything like that. So with all of that said, before I go ahead and pass out, because I need to go take a nap after this, thanks for watching. Let me know what you're thinking about the meta so far. Let me know what you think about the tournament, and let me know what you think about Data Vault Sabine. If you know anything more about that, or you're expecting it, let me know. I'm very curious. It was awesome to see. I watched a couple of the games, but as I said, I wasn't able to watch a whole lot this weekend. Thanks for watching. I'll see you all for the next one.